A poster of a mother and child cost the British government more than a battleship, and worked better than either. Walk with me past this 1917 recruitment poster. It's not asking for soldiers, it's asking for money, and it's one of the most successful psychological operations ever printed. The irony: it wasn't designed by the War Office. It was designed by advertisers, the same people selling soap. Let's rewind to 1914. Britain entered the Great War with a problem. The government needed money, enormous sums, faster than taxes could raise them. So they did what every desperate debtor does. They borrowed. But they couldn't borrow from banks the way we do now. They had to borrow from their own citizens. This is where the posters come in. War bonds. The government printed them by the millions. Images of soldiers, mothers, children, crucified Belgians, drowning sailors. Each one carried the same message: lend us your money now and we'll pay you back with interest later. It was essentially a consumer debt product. But instead of selling cars, they were selling patriotism. The scale was staggering. By 1918, the British government had borrowed roughly £5 billion, an amount so large it reshaped the entire British economy. For context, that's equivalent to hundreds of billions in modern currency. And most of it came from ordinary people: shopkeepers, clerks, widows, schoolteachers. They bought bonds believing in victory and return. Here's the problem nobody talks about: the war ended, but the debt didn't. In 1919, Britain owed more money than it had ever owed in its history, and the posters didn't stop. They just changed their tone. Where 1917 showed heroic soldiers, 1919 showed exhausted workers. The message shifted from "win this war" to "pay for that war." The debt created what historians call fiscal trauma. Britain had borrowed so heavily during the war that the 1920s became a decade of austerity, unemployment, and social unrest. Taxes stayed punishingly high. Public services contracted. And the posters kept appearing, now asking people to keep lending to a government that couldn't afford to pay them back quickly. By the 1930s, this is crucial, Britain's debt burden hadn't just failed to shrink. It had become a permanent feature of government finance. The posters from the Great War had created a citizenry trained to lend to the state in times of crisis. And in 1939, when World War II began, the government knew exactly how to activate that muscle memory. The WWII War Bond campaign was, in many ways, a sequel using the same script, but the posters were different, more emotional, more desperate. Your courage, your sacrifice, your savings. The language blurred the line between military service and financial obligation. They weren't just asking for money. They were asking for faith in an outcome nobody could guarantee. And it worked. Again. Between 1939 and 1945, the British public lent the government roughly £12 billion through war bonds. $12 billion. In a country of about 47 million people. That's a per capita burden that would be unthinkable today. But the posters, they made it feel like duty, not debt. Here's what the posters never showed. What happened after. In 1945, Britain had won the war but lost the financial ability to keep its empire. The debt was so large that the government had to restructure it over decades. Some bonds weren't fully repaid until the 1980s, 40 years after the war ended. The psychological engineering in those posters is what matters here. They didn't just raise money. They created a framework where ordinary people internalized government debt as personal responsibility. The posters told you, lending to the state is patriotic. Not lending is selfish. Defaulting is unthinkable. This matters because the same mechanism appears in modern consumer lending. Credit card companies don't show you debt. They show you freedom, convenience, success. Student loan marketing doesn't say borrow $100,000 for uncertain returns. It says invest in your future. The poster changed the product, but the psychology stayed the same. The British government understood something that's often forgotten. Debt isn't just financial. It's narrative. It's emotional. A poster of a child saying, "Daddy bought me victory bonds," is more powerful than any interest rate. It makes the borrower feel like the lender, like they're in control, not trapped. The posters eventually came down. The bonds were paid off or restructured or forgotten, but the habit remained. Britain continued to borrow. Citizens continued to lend. And every time the government needed money in a crisis, Suez, the Falklands, even the 2008 financial crisis, the same psychological framework was there, waiting to be reactivated. This is the real story the posters tell. Not the victory narrative printed on them, but the invisible one underneath. How a government in debt becomes skilled at making that debt feel like virtue. How patriotism becomes indistinguishable from financial obligation. How a poster can reshape an entire society's relationship with money. When you walk through the archive, what strikes you isn't the art, it's the efficiency. These weren't made to be beautiful. They were made to work, to persuade, to make a stranger feel like they had a stake in a war they might never see. And by every measure, they succeeded. The debt proved it. Understanding how these posters worked, the language, the imagery, the psychological pressure, isn't just history. It's literacy. It's the ability to recognize when you're being shown a product and when you're being shown a narrative designed to make you feel responsible for something that's actually a transaction. That skill matters now more than it ever did. This video is for educational and informational purposes only and is not financial advice. Always do your own research. Subscribe to explore more hidden systems that shaped how we borrow, spend, and believe. There's a new story like this every week. This video is for educational and informational purposes only and is not financial advice. Always do your own research.